Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing a review of Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This is an adult fantasy that is a standalone, and it's a loose retelling of Rumpelstiltskin. In this, we are following three main perspectives, one of which is Miriam, who is Jewish, and she is the daughter of a moneylender. The second is Wanda, who is the daughter of a farmer, and she is coming from an abusive household. And then the third perspective is Irina, who is the daughter of a duke, who is trying to marry her off for political advantage. But Miriam is really the one who sets off this story. Not only do we start with her perspective, but it is her actions that really set a series of events in motion. So Miriam's father is a moneylender, but he's very bad at being a moneylender and is consistently taken advantage of. And Miriam becomes fed up with that, and she takes over her father's business and becomes the one who controls the money lending in this town. And she ends up being really good at it. She is a really good businesswoman and makes a lot of really smart decisions. And along the way, a rumor starts that Miriam can also change silver into gold. And the Fae of this world, who are called the Sterek, hear about this, and they want Miriam to change silver into gold for them. And that is what sets off also a lot of the moving parts of this story. The story is set either in Russia or a Russian-inspired world. I was never quite sure if it was like actually Russia or if it was just Russian-inspired, but it is a very wintry setting. It has a very wintry atmosphere. Personally, a wintry atmosphere is not like my favorite kind of atmosphere, but if you really like a wintry atmosphere, I think you may really enjoy the atmosphere of this book. The Sterek, who I was saying are the Fae of this world, are kind of these like winter ice Fae. And we do get to visit their like ice kingdom, so you get even more of this like winter ice world vibe. This is only the second book that I've read by Naomi Novik, but whenever I read her books, I find her writing style just really easy to read and very accessible, so I always enjoy that element of this. I think that the story is a fairly slow-moving story, but I think that the writing is not overly dense, and so it balances well. In the storytelling and in her writing, I think she does a really good job of mixing in the folklore into the story itself, but also just into the style of writing, the way the story is told, and the atmosphere of this world through the writing. It has a very folklore feel to it, which I really like. One thing that I've heard a lot of people comment on, which I kind of agree with, is that there are a lot of perspectives and a lot of perspective changes, and they aren't really marked. You only get like a symbol to show that we're in a new perspective, but they don't tell you whose perspective you're reading from. I think that it is pretty easy to tell who you're reading from context clues. You can really quickly, like in a couple sentences, figure out where you are and who you're reading from. But I agree that it would have been nice if they had marked whose perspective we were reading from each time, so I can understand why that would be confusing to people. The plot of this is very, very loose in its Rumpelstiltskin retelling elements, but I really liked that. It really took the idea of retelling and made the story into something new and really grew it and expanded it into something that was more interesting than just retelling the same story. I think it also went somewhere that I wasn't really expecting it to go. So I thought that that was really interesting as well. There were times that I felt like the story meandered a little bit, or there were points where I kind of would go in and out of caring about what was happening in the book. One of the things that I had the strongest opinions about was the ending. I think there were things about the ending that I really liked, because there was a point where it could have kind of wrapped up and ended really easily and really quickly in a really obvious way, but it didn't do that. It like took another turn and went in another direction and kind of kept going and had a different ending again from what I was expecting. And I really liked that there was this opportunity to end it really easily, and she didn't take that. Again, she kind of like expanded it further and built it out more, so it was this more satisfying ending in a way. There were two things that I didn't love about the ending. One was that there was a section of the ending that didn't need to happen. There's like a loophole that somebody realizes, because a lot of this revolves around making deals with the Fae, and so with deals there are always like loopholes and things. And there was one loophole that somebody realized, that if they had just realized it like 50 pages earlier, a whole section of the book didn't need to happen at all. So that was kind of frustrating to me about the end. I also didn't really like the way some of the romances end. This isn't a romance heavy book, which I liked. I just didn't like the way some of the characters were like paired off. And I think that was, the romance was one of my main complaints about Uprooted, and so I'm just wondering, maybe I just don't like the way that Naomi Novik does romances. But in terms of relationships in the book, I did really enjoy that familial relationships were more central to the story than the romantic relationships. And there were elements of found family that I really enjoyed as well, and that, you know, family can mean different things. As for the characters in this, I did like all of the characters that were in it. I was not super like attached to anybody in this. I wasn't really that emotionally invested in any of the characters in this, but I did like most of them, and I was interested. I did want to know what became of these three girls, and also the side characters as well, because there are some very endearing side characters. But I did think it was interesting that with the like villains or antagonists of this story, she did an interesting job of fleshing them out, because they are they're villains that I think it could have been easy for them to be very flat characters. And again, I feel like she did not like take the easy way out, and she made sure to flesh out their characters more and make them more interesting and more understandable, which I really appreciated. For me, one of the things that I was most excited for and most apprehensive about was the fact that one of the main characters in this is Jewish, so I was really interested to see how the Jewish rep was done, because I'm always looking for fantasy books that have Jewish rep in them, but it's not always done well. So that was something that I was very interested but apprehensive about. Overall, I feel like the Jewish rep was actually really well done in this. For Miriam and her family, I think that their Jewish identity, their Jewish values were really well woven into these characters and their lives. And it was done in both more subtle ways and more overt ways. I could see you know, different kinds of Jewish values or Jewish perspectives kind of coming through in the way that they relate to the world. And there were times, especially when Miriam was trying to outsmart the Starrick King and making deals with him, that she would do things that I could see that I was like, oh, that's very much like Jewish logic, the way that she was thinking about things and thinking her way around stuff. So I really enjoyed those more subtle ways that were kind of woven into the characters and their thoughts and worldview. And then there were also more overt ways that their Jewish identity was part of their character. Miriam consistently celebrates Shabbat throughout the story. She will think or talk about Jewish values, Jewish laws, biblical stories, rabbinic opinions, and so there were also these more overt ways that it was very clear that she was a Jewish character. And I just appreciated that it was made very clear and that it was very consistent throughout the entire story, and it wasn't just like, oh yeah, they celebrate Hanukkah one time and then it's never mentioned again, which a lot of stories do. So I appreciated the consistency and the clarity of her Jewish identity. The only thing that I didn't love about the Jewish rep in this was just the fact that Miriam's family are moneylenders. And that is something that I know is historically accurate. I'm not saying that it's not historically accurate, because for a long time being a moneylender was one of the few occupations that was available to Jewish people, so that is something that's historically accurate. But in fantasy, we don't always have to be historically accurate, and it's just something that I am kind of tired of seeing, and it's something that happens, I think, a lot with different when there are different like minority groups who are included in fantasy books, that they suddenly have to like be historically accurate, and it starts to feel like this need for historical accuracy that is only applied to characters who are part of a minority group, in this case a character who is Jewish. Is the historical accuracy is there to justify their existence, because their existence isn't like worthy of being in the story, without the historical accuracy of it, which is something that I just find frustrating. I would love to have a fantasy story that has a character who's allowed to be like a Jewish character, but is also just allowed to be a character in a fantasy story without having to have historical accuracy to like justify their existence, when their existence doesn't need justification. They're allowed to exist. So that is something that I found frustrating about this, and I know that her being a moneylender is pretty central to how the plot even happens, but I don't know, it's just something that I kind of get annoyed about. But overall, as I said, I think that the Jewish rep was done very well. I also thought it was interesting when she is interacting with the Sterek and making deals with them, and they have a strict way of thinking about fairness because their magic is really run by making deals. And so we get to see this contrast of the Sterek concept of fairness versus Miriam's concept of fairness. And in this comparison, Miriam gets to represent humanity and the warmth of human decency. So I've talked a lot about Miriam, but I think that all of the girls in this were really interesting. I enjoyed how resourceful all of them were, because all three of these main characters are put in these really impossible situations, and they have to be really clever and really resourceful in order to save themselves and the people that they love. I also recently lent this to my mom to read, and she absolutely adored this book, and then we got to talk about it. And after talking with my mom about this book, I actually appreciated it a lot more, because I think this is one that really benefits from discussion. I think there are a lot of layers and nuances that can really be discussed in this one. So this could be something that would be very good for like a book club. And so I'm glad that I got a chance to talk to her about it, because in retrospect, I enjoyed it more, and through discussion I enjoyed it a lot more as well. I think that maybe I would like it more upon reread, now that I have kind of a different perspective on it in retrospect. But even so, the first time reading it, I did enjoy this, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So that is all for my review of Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!